Welcome to the Everyday Entrepreneur. Today we have special guest with us, Crookes, who is an aspiring entrepreneur that I've known for 2 years, 3 years at this point. I will say that if you've watched the other Everyday Entrepreneurs, I've kind of gone in order. So, the first podcast we did, Chad Justin. So I met with him. We talked about his new business. He started at Ohio State. Our second was Mike Nemeth, who actually started in 2015, built a company, successfully exited, and now works for a big company that rhymes with Misny. And then Deb Papish, who we had, who is a really exciting person. I'm sure you know her. Everybody in the world knows her.
Absolutely.
But she really talks about the profitable nonprofit. But my idea with you own a robotics company, right? And have started a robotics company. So I think there's a few things that I think are really key to get into today. So can you first of all just give us your background, give us your story, and tell us why you started building a robot?
Yeah, absolutely. So my background is as an engineer, so biomedical engineer and physics degrees, highly technical, worked in the medical field a little bit doing surgical devices, then worked for Procter & Gamble in Cincinnati in their research development group and engineering, building robots to kind of democratize household tasks for them. And it was kind of during that period that we started to see a lot of the shortages in healthcare and started to see what those impacts of those shortages actually did for the patients that were in those rooms. And this is kind of isolation rooms, and somebody's pressing a call button and it takes hours for a nurse to respond because they're doing something else that's probably taking care of a coding patient, something more critical.
And
right?
you learned about that through, again, obviously, we've heard your story, but the reason you wanted to build robots was
Yeah, really, it's patients shouldn't.
Your story.
My story personally.
Yeah, why you personally? It had something to do with throw up, didn't it?
Yeah, so you go into a hospital and you see somebody sitting in the bed, and we had families and friends that were in this situation where they come in and you're pressing a call button and nobody responds. And so you walk in and it's like, hey, you had to go to the bathroom and nobody helped you to the bathroom. Yeah. You had to get a nausea bucket and there was nobody there to get a nausea bucket, so you have throw up running down your chest. And so we said, okay, what does that look like for somebody to just press a call button and it's not a nurse that responds, but it's a robot that actually goes and grabs that nausea bucket.
That makes sense, right? Because the reality is we've all been in the situation. Nurses aren't doing it on purpose. There's staff shortages. We could, I'm sure, get into all those reasons why. Nurses are amazing, but we're saying, okay, there's certain tasks that need to be automated, and the way you're going to do it is through robotics.
Yeah,
right?
And we said we're going to automate the tasks, or at least our initial premise was let's automate the tasks that are kind of below a nurse's degree in their education, right? They're trained to take care of patients. They're not necessarily using their education when they're grabbing a water bottle or grabbing a nausea bucket.
Absolutely.
And so that was the impetus. And I did this still while working at P&G of let's build a prototype, let's test this out in a hospital room, let's see what this works. And at that point, then we were awarded some National Science Foundation funding. And so that was basically went out and told the National Science Foundation, so backed by the United States government and taxpayer dollars, so thank you, everyone watching this, that we've got this potential opportunity, we have some novel research, let's go do something with this and give us a little bit of money to see if this works. And so we got our kind of first direct infusion of about $250,000.
That was from a grant?
From a grant, yep.
Okay.
And so that was all non-dilutive funding. And that gave us just a little bit of funding to say, hey, go get an actual robot, see if this is something that people actually want to purchase.
Absolutely.
And that was the start then of the entrepreneurial journey. I didn't really start this with the hopes of starting a company. It was more, hey, there's a problem. I have this skill set to kind of apply technology to this problem. Let's just see what we can do. And as it turns out, with that solution, we started kind of shopping it around. And no, people didn't really want to buy it. They acknowledged there was a need, but when you think about economic drivers in healthcare, because we're playing in the healthcare space,
sure.
Grabbing a water bottle for somebody doesn't really pay the bills at the end of the day. And so convincing somebody to spend that much money on a robot is tough.
And you got to put the robot in field and have it work and have customer service and have tech.
Oh, it's expensive.
Yeah, you literally have to build the infrastructure,
right?
So, so what are you thinking when you have gotten $250,000 from the government? And again, love the government, right? Like,
Sure.
and this is where, a lot of focus from my side is on the VCs and who's funding it and who's going to fund that story. But really, you're trying to get to a point where you actually have a story and you know what that number would be, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, so that's what that incentivized, or the incentive of the $250,000 helped.
Yeah, exactly. Right? Yeah, I mean, at that point, we didn't really have much, and I'll be honest, I probably would not have taken money from somebody because it was so high risk. I had no clue what I was doing. I mean, barely do today, admittedly. But
That's funny.
The premise is, let's go do something that's highly impactful, but also like crazy risk. And so if we pull it off, this is going to be huge.
Sure.
And if we don't pull it off, it's okay. It's just a little bit of money and it's non-dilutive. And so the government and the NSF are kind of propping up high reward and kind of high scalable ideas that are really high risk. And the whole point of that funding is get you far enough to prove out a concept and try to find a little bit of product market fit, which is a big thing that we're kind of driving through, is making sure you're building something that actually solves a problem that somebody's willing to pay for.
Absolutely.
Right? And so we're down at Orlando Health in Florida working kind of with their venture team and their kind of innovation clinical group. And we run into a physician, we're being told no, no, no over and over again. And so we're kind of like, okay, well, we got to pivot. And we have one doc that comes up to us at the end of the immersion and he says, hey, this is great, but he said, if you can have your robot do ultrasounds, then we'll buy 50 of them. And I said, sure, why not? Like,
yeah, I mean,
why not?
No startup starts as the idea that you think that it did, right?
For sure.
Literally, COHatch was a gym. I mean, like it was Mesh Fitness.
Right.
I mean, I'm just, no business, right? So, okay, so perfect time. So the government, first of all, like, I actually believe that a lot of businesses don't give the government credit for the amount of money and funding that they give, to help. And again, I'm a pure capitalist, so I'm not trying to say that I do believe that, private can solve problems, but I think you're incentivizing the right things, the right activity, the right motivation. And again, robotics. Clearly, this is something where there should be money out there because we don't want to get behind other countries just due to, from a defensive perspective, it's going to hit every single part of our lives in the next few years, right?
So, sure. Yeah.
So where do you see your company and where do you see the world from a robotics? And again, when I say English, I know you claim you're not smart, which is fine, but you're obviously you have to bring it down to all,
right.
all the everyday people out there
Layman
like myself who don't understand, the real jargon. So
sure.
There's going to be a robot doing what at my house or working with us?
You have, I think, a little while until robot's at your house doing something, only from a safety perspective, because right now, one of the big problems in robotics is you get a big red button on the back that's my emergency stop. So if it starts doing something crazy, I'm going to press that button.
Okay.
And a lot of robots are heavy and they fall and you don't want to crush someone. However, the current state of robotics right now in different industries is kind of matured at different rates. So in industrial industries, right, where you're manufacturing, you're shipping, logistics, robots have really taken off, and that's because you can kind of remove people from those environments and you can work with autonomous systems that are a little more dangerous, but you don't have to be collaborative. And so
this is the automotive robotic arm that comes in, lifts,
automotive
does,
robots, exactly.
That type of stuff.
Yeah, and there's robotic welding now that uses artificial intelligence to understand where a weld needs to go.
And we do with Fire Rover, we actually created the Hot Work robot, which it was named by FM as the Hot Work robot, but it does hot work, fire watch for those projects, right?
Yeah,
so it's
exactly.
you're watching a robot do it, but you're making sure there's no fire around it.
Yeah,
and
for sure.
Cool, right?
Yeah, it is. I think the next big trend in robotics is coming where you have a lot of humanoid robotics right now. And so you're seeing some come out of Tesla, and there's a number of other startups that you got 2 legs, 2 arms, and they kind of chunk around. And those are also being pushed into that automation of kind of industrial processes right now, just because they've got money and they're trying to move a lot of product really quickly in that manufacturing setting. The revolution we're seeing in healthcare robotics is around some of these ancillary tasks, but also in kind of remote access. And so one of the big...
Because of the danger.
Because of the danger, but also in a lot of the challenges in healthcare, you have to have the patients and the provider, so your doctor, your sonographer, or whoever that's trained to do something, in the same spot at the same time.
Right.
And one of the ways that we can now see more people, so if you have fewer doctors seeing all these patients, now patients are driving, they're flying, delays, one of the ways we can actually see all these people is by using remote autonomous or semi-autonomous systems such as robots, to say, great, come in and let me draw blood, let me grab your blood pressure, and let me take a picture of your heart with an ultrasound machine.
Got it.
And then you can send that back to a doctor, and so now you have equity of care and you have access to care. So somebody in rural West Virginia can get the same level of care as if you're in Cleveland at the Cleveland Clinic.
But the robot that you're talking about doesn't have 2 arms and 2 legs.
Right now, it just has 1 arm and a couple eyes. Yeah,
Really? It's good.
We're starting with
I don't
one
know
arm.
what you're doing. I'm not going to judge you. You can
Yep.
make it look like whatever way you want. But I'm sure there'll be judgment.
Starting with 1 arm. One of the big revolutions in robotics is the ability to apply AI on top of robots
Right.
now. And so before, especially in automotive kind of manufacturing, your robot did the same thing over and over again. So you had the same piece of the car, so the robot's programmed to go to here, pick it up, and put it here. And if a piece is misaligned, then it's going to crash and everything kind of messes up in that cycle. So one of the things that's really coming about in robotics is how do robots now process information to do different things? And that's been the big kind of unleashing of this new wave of technology to say, we have a change in the environment that the robot's in. The robot has to react accordingly. And now you can start to apply large language models like ChatGPT on top of training robotics to make them even more capable and reactive to different situations.
100%. I mean, waste and recycling, like you're seeing robotics now with all the products that's coming in, they're basically able to pull out all the contaminants, right, before it goes in and gets processed, and then it goes into commodity, right? So like, to your point, before it was just like, right? Like
Right.
now all of a sudden you put AI on it, and now they're doing like the work of 15 sorters. So
Sure.
So from a healthcare perspective, you see it doing. I mean, the reality is that it's not an unsafe environment, right? Like, I mean, the reality is you have to make sure that it's safe in its environment. So right now you're working out of a government lab, or what's the lab look like?
Right now, our clinical lab is actually, it's in Dublin as well, and it's got kind of, HIPAA certified connections. And so we have a motion capture system set up, we have a clinical bed, we have an ultrasound machine, and we can bring potential volunteers in, patients in, sonographers in, and we can then run robotic ultrasound scans on them either in person or we can do it remotely.
That's awesome.
It's definitely a perk for our employees. You can get as many heart ultrasounds as you want.
I'm sure. Like, what is that? I mean, a heart ultrasound. Like, what do I get? I mean, I'm a 50-year-old guy, so like,
Sure,
of course,
come by.
This is big. Like, does it like check like for, like if I have like clots or anything, or?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, so one of the leading causes of death in the United States is heart failure, and so one of the ways you're first going to see heart failure is you basically take an ultrasound machine, so it's a black and white video camera essentially that you'd use for like a fetal ultrasound to see a baby. You put it on your heart and you can say, hey, how much is my heart beating? Is it squeezing the right amount?
Yeah.
You look at the valves moving in there and you say, are my valves closing or do I have blood going the wrong way in the heart?
Yeah.
And you look at 5 views kind of across the chest and take measurements and say, what's your wall thickness? Do you have a hole in your heart going blood left and right? I mean, it's a pretty important scan.
No, I mean, that's good. So will you offer that to all COhatch members?
Sure.
Okay,
Come on by.
All COhatch members, you heard it here. We're actually come on by to Dublin, and it's actually funny because we've done a few pitch competitions, but you won one, and then Thierry Cersei won one, and her product was basically mapping out the heart, right?
Yeah.
Like, and it's like, and then we had people who were doing, like a book for kids. You know what I mean? So we try to we try to see where it fits. And again, you're probably so. Talk to me about how you've raised money, right? Like you got that an initial $250,000, and then I assume at some point you've raised more. But you've gotten more non-dilutive grants?
Yeah, we actually just secured a phase 2 NSF grant, so that's $1 million non-dilutive, and that's purely to continue the research on basically taking AI and applying it to our robotics platform.
Okay.
Say, how do we do this on all different patient sizes and different heart conditions, and does somebody have something abnormal, and what does our robot do in those instances? But from a raising money perspective, we did have just a small friends and family founders investment early on, and that was to kind of help with some of the tax implications of having to in the weeds a little bit around NSF grants, but we had to amortize our R&D spend over 5 years, which meant we had to raise money to help pay for some of that on the tax front.
I love it. Like speaking English, it's amazing.
It's good. But
right to my level.
We we went out and we raised a venture-led round. We closed about $1.6 million, which was awesome. And that was led out of a hospital venture capital fund. And so they, out of Orlando Health, and we have a number of angels on that group as well. And we have 3 venture capital funds on that table as well.
Okay, so basically I would say you're successful, but also trying to prove a business model. You're still commercializing,
sure,
right?
yeah.
And you're still working on technology, and you're still like if you were looking and saying like this business is around, I mean, are you thinking, I mean, you're in, the earliest stages. I mean, what's your next step is really like, because I mean, you said you're actually working with Orlando Health, so you're actually doing these clinical trials. So like, does the FDA approve it? Is that?
We will be, yeah. So we're actually having a meeting with the FDA in February to kind of tease our concept to them and make sure they agree with our pathway to safety.
Okay.
So we will be a FDA-regulated medical device, and our kind of on our milestone mapping is our goal is to have FDA clearance by the end of next year, so 2025. It's not a necessarily quick process.
Yeah, no, I mean, and listen, with Fire Rover, we were still working on FM, 10 years later, and we finished all the testing and done everything, so we're waiting to find out. Hopefully by the time this airs, we'll have already gotten it. And I think, that's really like the biggest piece that I'd like to kind of walk through, right? Like, so how does Aaron work? Right? Like what makes you, like take away robots, take away all the other stuff, like how does Aaron work best? And then, again, I'm clearly going to say like, I know there's obviously for the first couple of years you were working with us, but like, just like what worked, what didn't. And again, now that you're in a HIPAA compliant, like I always say, it's good that you moved, you know what I mean? Like you were a successful Boost Scholar, right?
Yep.
Like, and again, I think you're still a member, but I mean, the reality is that, there's like, what was your value of how you were able to use it, and then how you were able to use the rest of your life, like, for any of our guys out here who are hustling and, basically learning how to build a business.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that talking to people that aren't founders or aren't in the entrepreneurial world is they see, hey, I raised $1.6 million and I raised $1 million of non-dilutive, and they're like, man, you are so wealthy. Like, where's your Lamborghini? And it's like, no. Actually, as a founder, I make very little money.
Right.
Right? And the whole point is how much money can I put back into the startup to get it as far as possible? And so it's not necessarily like, hey, I raised this round and look, your CEO cut some massive check out of this. It's, no, I've got to make every single dollar count, and I've got to make every dollar go even further than a dollar normally would. And it doesn't matter.
100%. Your burn rate's everything.
Exactly. And I look at that every night before I go to bed. Just how much money did we spend today? And then I lose that much sleep over it.
Right. No, 100%. And that's the biggest thing, right? You're basically fighting to like non-funding.
Yeah.
When are you working for free, right?
Yeah,
if you have money and you get it, are you working on the right things? Are you working on the right priority?
Yeah.
And again, like on a daily basis, like what's your, do you really look at it every single day? And like
absolutely.
You do take it personal. You go to bed and you think about it, right?
For sure.
Which is what like, it's probably not healthy, but most founders do that, right? Like, I mean, that's because you're living this and breathing it every day. So that's the reality is this is your job 24/7, no matter where you are.
Yeah, and I mean, there's no really, I don't call it work-life balance, it's work-life integration, right? Like my life and my work are the same thing, and they tie into each other just as smoothly as anything else in my life. The thing, though, that really was impactful with that Boost Scholarship early is, hey, we got our $200,000 from the government. It doesn't mean we have money to go rent a space, right? It doesn't mean we have all of this funding that we can then go get some fancy lab and pay all this money for it. And so when we're trying to raise money and we have people coming in and they say, hey, I want to have a meeting in your office, it's like, well, okay, my basement's fine, but like this broom closet maybe with some cobwebs in a different building is okay, but like, where do we go? And so having some place that we can actually have coffee and put up a good show where people then walk away with a good impression of us as a startup to say, hey, that was our message is good and resounds kind of with what they're doing, but also this was a good place to have the meeting. It was comfortable, it was bright, and so that actually has a really big impact when we're trying as a small startup with very little funding to make an impression on someone.
100%. Like, I mean, you're having, even like having calls, right? Like your background, like you could do a fake background, but like it'd be nicer to like not do a fake background. You know?
Right.
Everyone can tell, right?
Yeah.
So like fake it till you make it, but I mean, the reality, and that's where, again, I look at a lot of the Boost scholarships and it's like, I don't. You won one of our competitions, so like, I'm sure that helped. I mean, I'm not like, but like, it is one of those like, how do you pay your bills in 90 days? And that's really the difference between the boost scholars and then the traditional VC. And there's so much money around VC, and there's so much money around these funding and big companies and all these things. But the reality to me, it's like the integrated lifestyle is the most important, right? And then the fact is that 80% of us are building our businesses this way. And like your business, even though it's tech, like I try to like, I feel like you're really, you're tech, but you're family funded through the government and family and friends. That's really how you funded your business.
Just to get it kind of up off the ground, exactly.
Well, and that's like, I mean, again, like, I'm sure you're going to start meeting with VCs at some point, and that's all good, no? Or is
I mean, we already have 3 VCs on our cap table.
Oh, you do? Okay, so that was the second round that you guys did.
Yeah, so our 1.6 dilutive capital was venture capital led, and so that was we have 3 VCs on there, and really when you raise VC, the clock starts ticking, and you've got to make sure you're ready to raise. Because venture capital funds have a fiduciary obligation, right? They've got investors in their fund that they have to pay money out to, and so they're saying, hey, to their investors, we can beat the stock market. So okay, we got to beat the S&P 500. So they're now looking at me to say, when are you exiting? How much are you going to exit for? What does that look like? And if we're still fleshing around for even what we want to build our robot for, that's a tough conversation to have when they're saying, hey, I'm ready to get out of this in 3 years.
Right.
When are we getting out of this? And so,
and are the horizons? And again, when you say 3 years, like that seems a little like shorter than I've heard. But like, is that? I mean, I honestly have no clue. I mean, my goal in life is never to take VC money.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Again, I love VC. I just like helping that you get to the point where you're actually like taken serious. Right. At that point, then it's like, okay, got it. Like. Hopefully we've done our job, right?
Exactly.
I mean, so
now there's the quip of 3 to 5x in 3 to 5 years is kind of what VCs kind of look like. It depends on who you raise from, though. Some may have different timescales on their funds that they invest through. Yeah. But I'm by no means a VC expert. But to your earlier question around kind of what makes this tick, it's not about the robots or the product, right? And it's really about doing something meaningful with the work that we're doing. And so if in a week we learn that robots aren't the future and there's some other way to actually get access to these patients in West Virginia that don't have access to a clinician, and that's better and people want that more, and obviously that would be a pretty big pivot, but it's something we would take into consideration. And yeah, we could torch the robots and find the best solution that actually solves the problem. And so we're trying to keep kind of a problem-oriented mindset as we kind of continue on and push. And I mean, it's fun to solve hard problems, right? Starting in healthcare is tough to begin with. And then you add robotics into that. And then you add AI on top of that is maybe one of the most challenging places that you can try to drive innovation.
Sure.
Because it's an industry that's doesn't really take well to having new things pushed into it.
Right, especially that haven't been tested for X amount of years and X amount of time.
Exactly.
And, they've had
pretty risk adverse.
I mean, they've had the benefit of as much time as they've ever needed.
Yeah.
But in our world right now, things move too fast, right? And it's like, I see in fire protection, right? Like there's no innovation in fire protection. And the reason why is because you can't get regulated, you can't get approved. It takes 10 years to prove it, so you have to be in a lab to prove it. Mm-hmm. And you end up spending how much money doing that, which again, only the big players can, which is exactly what we're trying to get. I want the small business guy who looks at it the way you do, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, the way you look at it is the right way to look at it, which is, listen, the world's our oyster. Let's figure out what makes the most sense, not I have to fit this in this box, right?
Exactly.
And, I have to make revenue out of it this way. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, let me get so if you had to do it again, would you change anything?
Yeah, I mean, there's some things probably logistically we would change. We would start up as a C corporation instead of an LLC, for example, right? Because that's kind of a nightmare to change. But from a strategy perspective, I think if we did it again, obviously we know where we would go, right? To say, okay, we understand the problems in the domain that we're working in. I think we started solving problems in a domain that our core team was unfamiliar with. And so if we did it again, we would bring in an expert as early as possible in this domain, meaning in the world of heart ultrasounds and in the world of diagnostic imaging, right? None of us on our core team were experts or even remotely proficient
I
in
introduced you to
diagnostic.
Terry, didn't I? Yeah. I mean, literally, you guys were both working on a freaking Dublin. It's crazy to me. Oh my God. Like, it is crazy how the world works, right? Like,
Yeah, exactly.
But anyway, so.
And so that would be one thing would be, if you're going to solve a problem in a very specific area, it helps if you're, one, an expert in that area, or if you have an expert in that area. And I think we now do on our team. We have cardiologists from Cleveland Clinic and Mount Carmel and Orlando and university hospitals. We've got them all over the country.
And they can help you.
And they are driving our product forward to say, this is what I need. But it took us a few months of, hey, spending money, kind of floating around, trying to understand the problem, a lot of YouTubing and
I mean, but it's funny you said it took us a few months, right? Like, that's like literally, I mean, that's what we're dealing with right now. We're literally dealing in months now.
That's the margin, yeah.
Well, and I mean, it just shocks me, like, again, almost 50 years old, the amount of how fast everything moves now. So even like, again, I still understand that there's people like, you know, who don't have internet, right? Like, I mean, there is like, you know, there's that disparity, but it's crazy how fast everything's moving. And that's where, like, you know, Elon Musk is saying that he's going to have a humanoid robot in your house doing all your stuff for you in less than 2 years for 30 grand. So I'm not saying it's
I'll wait to see it, yeah.
Well, I mean,
they exist.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, it's crazy. So, all right, last thing. You, from a, like, how do you see yourself in 5 years? Like, where do you see this company going? And again, I know you're trying, like, but, you know, where do you see it, and what's your, like, biggest piece of advice that you would have for anyone of our everyday entrepreneurs? Like, the little guy.
Sure. And, we'll start with the 5-year piece.
One more question, which is 2 questions, but that's kind of how I roll, so I apologize.
I know with the 5-year piece.
Yeah, let's go with 2 questions.
I think the goal for the company would be to have at minimum 100 robots deployed across the United States. And those would be robots performing ultrasound imaging using AI as a backbone to capture really good images. And so we would want those used every day for patients that specifically can't get ultrasounds
another way
where they live geographically.
100%, because that's where the real need is, and that's where the biggest risk is going to be taken.
Exactly. And for them, a lot of times too, that makes it cheaper, right? And so now you can actually reduce the cost of healthcare. Oh, that makes some people nervous, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, not anymore. I mean,
yeah, exactly. So I mean, that is you got to be obsessed if you want to start a company and be successful. And do it while you still work somewhere else. Do it on the evenings, on the weekends. Get up super early and get that grind, because the longer you can go while you're still making money, your family's secure, and progress an idea, a concept, a business plan, some go-to-market strategy, you're only going to be set up for more success, because the more you can kind of milk to say, okay, I'm learning, I'm doing customer discovery, I'm talking to customers, I'm ensuring product market fit, that's only going to help you. And the time to quit your job is not the first time to say, hey, I've had an idea to put salad dressing on a salad in a new way. Like, no, make sure that people actually want that before you quit your day job, because it gets really, really tough when, hey, we've got only a little bit of money in the bank and we've got to make this stretch. But as a founder and somebody who loves what I'm doing, I wouldn't change a second of it.
Yeah.
I absolutely love getting up every day and going to work. And if my alarm goes off at 5 a.m., I'm pumped, because that means I get to go start solving problems. And so, like, you couldn't pay me any amount of money in the world for that feeling. And so, yeah, it's hard, but that's what makes it fun and challenging.
No, 100%. And honestly, keeping your burn rate low, like, that is like the biggest piece of advice that, like, it's any startup, right?
Oh,
like,
yeah.
You literally lose all leverage with the more money you have, the more leverage you have. The less money you have, the less leverage you have, period, right? Like, so yeah. I 100% agree. But, well, it has been very fun having you on my podcast, on our podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Me and Morgan, I mean, he's behind. He can, come out, and he doesn't play drums, but he can definitely, he can sing for us if we need him to. No? Okay. Well, there we go.
Thanks for having me.
All right.
Appreciate it.